Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Geek. My apologies for the long delay of this video. I've been very busy with a lot of real-life issues, but let's kick it off and continue where we were last time. We've been talking about the end-time stuff based on Tribulation Theology and trying to just explain why most of this is wrong. Now, to their credit, there is some correctness about it and stuff, and we'll go over some of that as we make these videos. But I've finally been able to find my book by LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins called Are We Living in the End Times? I don't think I got the name right last time I mentioned it. So I'm going to be pulling from that because pretty much in modern times, now Mr. LaHaye died a few years ago, but still in modern times, they're kind of the forefront of scholars on this view of theology and kind of why there's this modern awakening to it in the Protestant churches, and we're seeing some Catholics starting to fall into it, but the problem is it goes against church teaching in many areas. So with these timelines, the first thing we're going to cover is what you see in this picture here below. It is the 4 pivotal events of history. So if we'll look at the chart real fast, you'll see it shows creation and the flood, and it labels these as ages past. And on the chart, you'll see a first line segment is at the Christ's first coming. And so far this is correct. Nothing wrong with that. Genesis, the law, history, Psalms, the Old Testament and prophets. Then it has the church age. So this represents the time of the church. Now again, this is following the Tribulation Theology view, not necessarily the Catholic view. Then we get to the second line, and it says tribulation. You'll see that second line actually is 2 lines real close to each other with a little small gap there. That gap is where the tribulation falls. It shows Christ's second coming there above the gap. And I think they purposely, for this chart, put the second coming just kind of in the middle of those lines because, as we'll talk about in a little bit, there's different views of when the rapture happens, and I think this was just meant to be a generic image for this. Then after the tribulation, you'll see this really long thing, and it says millennium, and then it ends on a bigger circle that says ages to come. So one thing we have to acknowledge about this, again, you could literally say the line all the way up to the tribulation part is correct. The church age, that's what we're in right now. The problem is they separate the millennium from that. The view in Tribulation Theology is that the millennium reign is a literal 1,000 years, but we know that numbers like 1,000 were used symbolically to just represent a large period of time. There is no indication scripturally that the age of the church and the millennium itself are 2 different things. So honestly, yes, it's been over a millennium. It's been over almost 2 millennium now, but that shouldn't really matter since it's a symbolic number of largeness. Because, go up to an average person and they don't know what 1,000,000 means. Go back a couple of thousand years, most people didn't know what 1,000 meant. So that's how these numbers are typically used. It also, when you notice it, it's going to require a third coming of Christ. Now, they won't label it as that, and we may get into this a little bit further later on, but what you have is Christ coming for the rapture prior to the tribulation in a lot of these viewpoints, and then coming again at the end of it. Now, I was talking with someone personally the other day, and this is a one-on-one contact, not online. I was face-to-face with this person, and we had a very civil discussion and agreed to disagree. But he explained, oh no, the rapture is not the second coming of Christ because Christ doesn't set foot on the earth. He just appears in the sky. And honestly, I think this is a very foolish argument. Now, this poor man, he fully believed this, and so I'm not going to criticize him, because this is what he fully believes. And it just doesn't make sense to say, oh, that's not the second coming because Christ didn't set foot on earth. He has come back to this realm. He is no longer in the heavens, as in the third heaven or the spiritual world at that point. So that is still a second coming of Christ. And then at the end of the rapture, when the whole judgment happens, Christ then comes back, and as they call it, the actual second coming, that's going to actually be a third coming. So therein lies that problem right there. Now, we are going to let's see. I'm skimming my notes right here. One last point to make is that this also requires one to deny Christ's call to suffering. See, depending on which view of the tribulation you view and how rapture works, some are going to suggest that the church will not suffer tribulations, even though the Bible point blank says multiple times that we as the church will suffer many tribulations. So it does require a complete denial of Christ's call to suffering. And I'm not going to get down into a little nitty gritty. These are just meant to be generic videos and stuff. If y'all want me to get into these specific details, I can do it. It will take me longer to make the videos, of course, because I'll have to do a lot more in-depth research. I know the answers, but I would prefer to have sources for it versus me just saying things and then accidentally misquoting. And as you can see from the last video, I got the name of this book completely wrong, so I don't trust my memory on some things all the time at 100%. So we're going to move along to our next image now. Okay, apologies for the little bit of a transition there. I'm doing this voice instead of actual video and then using images because I don't quite have the program down yet on how to do a PowerPoint type of situation and then click and keep going with my voice memo. Once I figure that out, I can make videos more like this a lot easier. So please bear with me on this. Our second picture, this is going to be a little bit shorter of a version thing we're discussing, but it's going to be on the 3 views of rapture. So to their credit, they actually do point out there are different views of the rapture. So even though this book is clearly very biased when it comes to tribulation theology, they do acknowledge even their own views have a division amongst them. And as we can see, it shows the 7-year tribulation, because that's what the belief in this theory is. And honestly, there's really nothing against, even in Catholic viewpoint, that there being a 7-year tribulation, because there does, seem to be a point that there will be a time period of an Antichrist. And we can get into this stuff again. If you have questions about that, just leave them in the comments and we can talk about that at another time. But the 3 views of the rapture are, when you get to the tribulation, you have a pre-tribulation rapture. And in this view, the church does not suffer any of these tribulations. Again, counter to what the Bible says. There is a mid-tribulation rapture. This is going to be your, they suffer some of the tribulations, like half of them, but the church won't suffer the worst of the tribulations. Then you have a post-tribulation rapture. This actually lines a lot better with what Catholic belief is, but it's not exactly what Catholic belief is, and I'll go into that in just a little bit. So you got these 3 different views. With the post-tribulation, Christ comes, and then it's also considered the glorious appearing as how they describe the second coming. And that's where the judgment happens and the millennial kingdom starts after the judgment. Where this differs from Catholic teaching is, you could take a lot of the stuff here from post-tribulation rapture, and it made perfect sense with Catholic teaching, but the best terminology used for what Catholics, we're not required to, but what's going to be towards Catholic belief, what we believe, is going to be what's called amillennialism. Now, some will say that's what post-tribulation rapture is, but that's not exactly true, because this theology requires there to be the 1,000-year millennial reign and then the days to come after that, like a final judgment. The church believes that the millennial kingdom is right now. The church is that millennial kingdom. And if you look at the church hierarchy, it is like a monarchy. In fact, each priest in his parish is a king, or is like a king among his parish, and each bishop is a king among his diocese, and it keeps going up from there. So as a quick aside, if you have a parish council that's telling your priest what to do and he believes fully that he has to do what they say, that's wrong. He can look at them and say, nope, I'm allowed to do what I want to, as long as it's within church teaching. It doesn't matter what you do as a council. So sorry, Susan, from the parish council. Sorry, I go off on things like that sometimes. So when it comes to the Catholic view, I'm getting my words mingled. You have the millennial kingdom happen before or during all of this, and then you have the tribulation, and then you have the what would be considered a post-rapture tribulation. So again, it's weird to call it that because the post-rapture tribulation would be the same moment of judgment and the glorious appearing and all that and stuff. So it's kind of this weird way to view it. But now there are some other micro divisions amongst different believers here. We're not going to really get into those. In fact, the mid-tribulation rapture, there's actually 2 different versions of it, which I cannot recall what they are off the top of my head. But yeah, again, this theology gets heatedly debated, a lot of division, and this is amongst the people that believe it. And again, yeah, it requires you to pull out a bunch of scriptures out of context from various books of the Bible and string them together. Not that some of these scriptures actually do work well together, because some, that's how the Bible works. It refers to things in the past and back and forth all the time, but it's the context that matters as well. So now we're going to move on to our third and final part of this video, and we'll go a little bit more over some of what I just said here or there. Okay, again, apologies for the odd transition. So this last section of the video, we're going to be discussing the tribulation period. So, again, there's a timeline in this as well. So what we have in this specific view is going to be following the pre-tribulation rapture. However, you can easily see where you could place the other ones in this chart. So if it was a mid, it would happen where you see the statue of the Antichrist. And then if it were post, it would be right there with Christ's glorious appearing. So, it's pretty easy to figure that part out. But if you've ever read through Revelation or had any talks about it, you'll know that there's different sets of judgments that happen. The first one being the seal judgments, the next set being the trumpet judgments, and then lastly, the bowl judgments. My understanding is the actual Greek says vial, but King James translates it as bowl. I guess historically those words could be interchangeable depending on what a bowl is used for, I guess. I'm not really sure. You'll notice in the chart it shows the division line of 3.5 years in the middle because the tribulation is 7 years. It doesn't say 3.5 on this chart. It does on the other chart, I believe. But you have the first half of the tribulation, which is, going to be pretty bad, but not the worst thing in the world. Then you have the Great Tribulation. And I know in this view, you have the Antichrist that makes himself aware with a treaty that's supposed to be signed and bring peace to the Middle East. Again, it starts getting really specific, like oddly specific. So it's like not necessarily something that's biblical when it gets into some of these nitty-gritty details. But you have the Antichrist show up. And even in these theologies, there's some argument about who the Antichrist actually is. Not his identity as much as what he is. Some think it's a person that's actually a dead person that's been possessed by Satan himself. Others think it's the son of Satan. But we all know that angels actually can't reproduce, so that makes no sense. Most likely it's going to be someone devoted to Satan, if anything like that. Now, some have made the argument that God will, because of all these pre-planned things, will give Satan the ability to actually impregnate someone because he's trying to copy Christ. And the whole point is to bring forward to these final judgments so man can really make their final decisions. That takes a lot of speculation. But you see the statue in the middle, and it sees the Antichrist there. This isn't the appearance of the Antichrist in this theory. What it is you have the Antichrist actually get killed, a shot in the head, and he's supposed to be dead. And again, this is getting really specific, and he's supposed to die, but then he comes back and he's even more ravaging than ever. Because first of all, in the first part, he's becoming a world leader and everyone loves him. The second part, those devoted to him still truly love him, but those that have been questioning will have no more questions about how horrible of a person he really is, because he'll be ravaging and killing anyone that doesn't fully agree with him. Again, this can fall in line with some Catholic teaching, but at the same time, it's very oddly specific for a book that's full of symbolism. So you have to take all this with a grain of salt. But there's also argument about after the Antichrist comes back to life, whether or not he actually died. Is a question. Some question is that he did die, and then Satan embodies him at this point, and it's actually Satan himself ruling everything at the end. I know there's going to be an anti-trinity. So you have the beast, which is the Antichrist. You have the prophet or the false prophet, which is supposed to kind of take over and rule the one world religion. And then you also have, of course, Satan himself, so it's sort of like Father, Son, Spirit. Again, I can actually see biblically where this can actually make sense. So if we did have a one world church, the one in charge of it would clearly be that false prophet. There is going to be an Antichrist. Catholic teaching verifies that there is many Antichrists with a lowercase a, and that there will be a Antichrist, like the single worst one. So that does fall in Catholic teaching. And of course, Satan, obviously that's true and stuff. Unfortunately, we see a problem in both Protestantism and Catholicism where people just don't really believe that Satan exists anymore. You have people like Bishop Barron sitting there saying there's a reasonable hope that all people are saved, which is completely counter to Christ's teaching. You have priests and bishops saying, oh, hell's not really real, it's symbolic and stuff. And, we can get all these problems. We can actually deal with all of this in another video if we want to. Again, if you would like me to make a video, just recommend them in the comments and we'll discuss that. Also, I'm a member of Amino. I run the Catholic Amino. If you have any questions about my videos, you could also contact me there. I do post the videos here on YouTube, but I also share the YouTube videos in that Amino. So I welcome everyone to come, and I will have links in the description below for all of that. I'm going to, on the next video, I think I've already got it in my mind to do this, but the 3 different sets of judgments, I'm actually going to break those down so we can just kind of go over them. And one thing we have to remember is the book of Revelation, it is a book of prophecy. But another thing we have to remember is prophecy does not mean fortune telling. It does not mean we are seeing into the future. It can mean that. But a prophecy, the prophets, they just spoke for God. We read the prophets of the Old Testament. Sometimes they're telling the past. Sometimes they're telling what's currently happening. And sometimes they do tell what will come. Or they might tell what might come if this continues to happen, kind of thing. So when we look at Revelation being a prophecy, it doesn't necessarily mean it's future telling. Most of it does seem to be that. But we do have to acknowledge that the book of Revelation has a large parallel with the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, back in my Protestant days, and yes, for those that don't know, I used to be Protestant, I used to be Church of Christ. Big change for me, obviously. But there's this big view that the Bible is completely literal on every single thing. There is no symbolism, even though sometimes it very clearly is symbolism, especially when Jesus uses parables or you see metaphors directly being used in Scripture. And what's funny is most of this tribulation theory, even though they require you to take things directly literally, they take these literal statements and then change them into a metaphoric meaning at the same time, because clearly the beast with 10 horns or something like that has to be symbolic, but it gets wonky and wacky and a little silly at times even. But yes, next video I do plan on trying to break down the different judgments, and we can go over why some of these either have already happened or even are currently happening, and look at the relationship with the Roman Empire. Now, the way I view Revelation is it directly parallels with Rome, but not exactly. So I'll say it indirectly, I guess is a better term to use, parallels with Rome. Because clearly some of the stuff is almost identical to what happened with Rome. And the book was written before these things happened in Rome. But there's just some things that don't make sense, because if you parallel it equally with Rome, this means that Jesus and second coming should have happened over 1,000 years ago. So we can get into that a little bit when we discuss the judgments as well. But anyway, I do apologize for the long delay in videos. Seeing that I now have this second house that I live in, or not live in, but that we own, I'm going to be using this probably to do a lot of my recordings and videos because it's so much quieter over here. I know you may hear vehicles driving in the background and maybe even a dog barking, but trust me, it's a lot quieter than having 7 children running around screaming at the top of their lungs. Anyways, thank y'all for watching. Leave comments below. Be sure to check us out on Amino. And just thank you for everything. God bless. Again,